Future Sense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nick Jeans and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, Future Sense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is Future Sense. Did we break the planet? This is the big question. Have we broken the planet, Steve?
We're stepping back to look at a bigger issue now, and this idea that we broke the planet, and not only did we break it, but no one can fix it except us, is an interesting thing, and it's very much reflective of the perspective and the value set of the emerging paradigm, this humanistic, network-centric way of being human that's emerging out of the end of the scientific industrial era. And this perspective it's shaping how we approach the whole issue of repairing the damage that's been done by the previous paradigm, and it's also impacting our capacity to bring about change. And so I think it's an important thing to talk about. And I started studying Clare Graves' work in 2003, and it was not long after that I started to sort of see a connection between the emerging "we broke the planet" movement and the way that human psychology was changing with this new paradigm emerging. And I could see that there was a bias in there, and we seem to be, humans in general, seem to be taking on board a whole bunch of guilt and responsibility too much, to the point where it was actually going to get in the way of our capacity to fix the things that we were saying were wrong. So let's unpack that a bit, and let's just have a look at what might be impacting those things. And to be clear, we're not saying that there isn't a problem. There certainly are problems. There are very significant problems that have been, some of them have been created by the previous way of being human, which was very resource intensive and not mindful of where we put the trash. And some of the issues, of course, are also associated with natural cycles of the planet and how the planet's changing long term. And there are certainly problems that we need to fix. So one of the clear trends is this anthropocentric thinking, which is also called, I found out, homocentrism. Is another
that's right.
Way of saying that.
Yes,
and
it's all about us.
That's basically what it comes back to. Is everything's about us, and it's useful, I think, to look back to the previous paradigm. Now, in fact, let's go back 2 paradigms. Let's go back to the agricultural era and just have a look at a bias that was at play. And, you could even use another word of maybe just a particular perspective on things rather than a bias. And that was the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe and everything rotated around the Earth. The sun rotated around the Earth, all of the stars rotated around the Earth, and basically, we were at the center of everything. And that was busted during the transition between the agricultural era and the scientific industrial era by the science, which said, well, actually, no.
Thanks, Mr. Galileo and friends.
We know it kind of looks like that, but when you really delve into it and collect some evidence, the story is different. And so we've got a similar kind of thing happening here, where we've put humans at the center of this cause and effect process of change. And it's no more correct than the Earth-centric view was back in the agricultural era. And it's got its uses, and these things always have their uses. Everything is part of a natural evolutionary flow, and so it's not that any of it is wrong.
Yeah, it's not either or.
It's not either or. It's not good or bad, but it's interesting and it's informative to be able to see these dynamics, because we can also see some of the impact that they're having, which might not be constructive from our point of view. So this anthropocentric thing is one of those things. It's like the Earth-centric thing, except it's the one of our time.
Yeah.
And I guess
Because also, if I just interrupt briefly there,
Yeah.
'cause I'm just thinking religion here in terms of that layer, the agricultural era, that period, which is also identified with the rise of the great religions, and that as we've been talking about.
Yeah.
But that notion of from the Bible of go forth and multiply, and that whole idea, I think, is then supported very strongly by that human-centric, that anthropocentric view of the world, that we can use everything because we're given that to use, and we are the centre.
Yeah.
We're God's given creature with
Children,
consciousness or something.
Yeah, true. So one of the issues that arises when we take this human-centric or anthropocentric viewpoint is it basically means that we're responsible for everything, and whatever happens is our fault. And not only that, but the onus falls upon us to fix everything that we see is not right. And in that, everything basically gets chucked in the same basket. So natural dynamics, which are part of long-term changes on the planet, how the planet operates, its modus operandi, get lumped in our basket, and we become responsible for things, that have been happening for long times, even before we were here. And one of those things is, of course, mass extinctions, where we look like I guess we're not 100% sure, but we look like we're moving into the sixth mass extinction now, and the other 5 happened before we were here. But this one's our fault. And this is not a black and white argument that we're putting forward. So we're not saying that we're not responsible at all.
Well, we've clearly contributed vastly to changes on the planet in the last couple of hundred years.
Of course.
However,
yes.
that we have a great ability to not look at the much longer cycles and the natural cycles and some of the things we simply do not understand, despite our incredibly advanced science relative to where we once were. We still don't really understand some of these greater, bigger forces that we are enveloped in as a planet.
Yeah, exactly. So we're kind of aiming for the middle ground here. We're not totally responsible, but we're not innocent either.
Yep.
We have had an impact. We've done things. We've made a terrible mess. The oceans are full of plastic. The air's been polluted. There's lots and lots of things that need fixing that were our
The water's stuffed, the soil is stuffed, the forests somewhat are stuffed, etc., etc. These are real things.
There's lots of work to be done.
Lots of work to be done.
The key issue is that we can do that work more effectively if we have an accurate description of our impact, and we understand what role nature's natural cycles are playing. We will be much more effective in addressing these issues. And it kind of comes back to the river analogy, and trying to cross a river as being representative of a change process. And if you understand how the river flows, then it's easier to get across without getting caught in unexpected currents or whirlpools and those sorts of things.
Or just to extend that, I mean, you stand across a raging river to get to the other side, and your first thought is, I've got to get across there quickly. So the easiest way is just to go straight across really quickly. But that's not the way to get across the river.
Not necessarily.
Not a raging river anyway.
Yeah. So where's this idea of us being guilty coming from? And the answer is, it's part of this regressive value search, which is characteristic of a paradigm shift. When our everyday values that we've been living by, in this case for a few hundred years, all of a sudden don't seem to solve our problems effectively, then the first human response is to look backwards to older value sets and think about a time when things were good, and then maybe try those out and see if they work. And so we're slipping back now to this agricultural era where the most dominant emotion was guilt. And if you think about, for example, the religious environment back during the agricultural era, and we're talking about the scientific industrial revolutions back through the Middle Ages, etc., guilt played an enormous role in religious life. There was and still is a set of rules that have been handed down by God which must be followed in order to live a dutiful, righteous life. And if you break those rules, then you are guilty and you are a sinner, and action
you will be damned
will be taken.
Or as my Latin teacher, my Welsh rugby teaching Latin teacher used to say, you slip down the slippery slide into the eternal bonfire. That was his favourite expression.
Oh, goodness me.
Yeah, sounded quite appealing to me.
Yeah, it's quite a colourful description. And so the idea of guilt is associated with having committed an offence or breaking a law. And so the implication here is, we're searching back to older values, which is taking us back to this black and white perspective on life, where there's a fairly clear set of rules that we have to follow, and it's as simple as that. And if you don't follow them, then you're a sinner or you're guilty. And so that kind of thinking is being applied to the present awareness of, planetary life conditions and the problems that need to be solved there. And one of the disadvantages of that is it's dumbing things down, and it covers up, it obscures all of the subtle relationships between natural systems and human influence also.
Yeah, I mean, that immediately challenges me, because God bless all the humans on this planet, but so many people simply don't seem to be able to uptake a bigger, more complex vision or version of things too often at this point in time. There's this kind of, as you said, a dumbing down, and we I think, don't want to refer too much to the election anymore, we've done that, but we can see that, as we mentioned, Morrison appealing to that, simplifying everything, make it really simple.
Yes.
And that's what people resonated with, and
yeah.
that's what the majority still resonate with. So we got a bit of a way to go to wake people up from that.
We do, and again, it's a natural evolutionary dynamic. And the advantage of learning about and understanding these dynamics is that you can shortcut the change process, and you can make it smoother and easier if you understand. It's going back to the river analogy. Yes. If you don't understand the river's dynamics, then it's chance, right? You jump in and you take what you get. And that's where most of the people in the world are right now in terms of understanding paradigm shifts, be they personal transformation processes or large-scale social paradigm shifts.
Yeah.
With some education and understanding of the dynamics of the river, using that analogy, and understanding where the river flows, where the eddies are that you can get caught up in, and where the best places are to cross the river, you can get across the river more easily and with less harm, less suffering. And that's the aim of digging deeper into these dynamics and sort of communicating them. So what we're talking about here in particular in relation to guilt is moral development. And in the spiral of human development, each paradigm is alternatively focused on living life with an individual focus and changing the world to suit yourself, or alternatively, it swaps between that and living life with a communal focus and changing yourself to fit with the requirements of life and your community. And it's within the communal systems, you can call the individual systems masculine themed, and you can call the communal systems feminine themed. That fits. So it's within the feminine themed communal systems that moral development occurs. And when you live in community, there has to be an agreement of standards and ways to live. And basically that's what morals are. Morals are a tool for communal living to help everybody get on the same page in terms of understanding what it's okay to do and what you don't do within this community of any size. And so it's only within those communal systems that moral development occurs. And when we break out into the individual systems, like the modern scientific industrial that we've just been through, we tend to reject those standardized ways of living, and we want to basically tread our own path. We want to break the rules, actually, and we want to see how we can live differently by being an individual.
Yeah, well, there's no absolute truth in that scenario, and it's almost like that's a play in itself. That you can't tell me that's the absolute truth, because over here my experience is this, and I'm going to use this, my version of the truth, my distortion even of the truth, in order to achieve what I want to achieve. And value systems sort of break down, their morals, ethics kind of sort of fall apart. And we're certainly seeing that throughout particularly the Western societies and most third world countries that are becoming more capitalised as we go forward.
That's right. And as we're moving now back into a communal way of being human, one of the biggest criticisms of the previous system is that it breaks the rules. It's unethical. Yeah. It doesn't fit with the accepted moral values.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if we look at the historic unfolding of those communal systems, we've had the traditional tribal, which had its customs, and they were its version of morals. In the agricultural era, there were the rules given by some higher authority, which was often God, a list of ways to live, a list of rules to follow. And in this emerging system, we'll see a new kind of moral development, which, understanding the themes of this system, ought to be something that's developed amongst peers. So it ought to be that we consult with our peer group, our community, our village, and we work out amongst ourselves what the morals are, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable.
And I guess we could say that this has been, in some senses, the expression of, for example, again, generalising here, we are, just as Steve said several times, we are generalising, so taking that into account, but the whole hippie movement, the New Age movement, to me is examples of an early attempt to try and create a sort of new, levelled out set of value systems and ethics and morals that aren't dominated by some god with a beard or some other shit like that.
Yeah, exactly. And whereas if we look back to the agricultural times, we could say, okay, the dominant emotion there was guilt. It was like, do as God says or you'll be guilty and reap the consequences. But with this emerging paradigm, if we take the 60s as an example of a flare-up, then it looks like love is the dominant emotion here. Yeah. It's like live according to love.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. And bearing in mind that we're in transition now, so this new paradigm hasn't flowered yet. We've seen early versions of it in pockets, but it hasn't flowered yet. It hasn't created a set of life conditions that are fully supportive of its way of living. And it's only then that we'll see its full potential. So we're kind of in a no man's land where we haven't quite got the new morals nailed down. We haven't figured out what they are exactly. It's kind of an experiment in progress. We've got no morals from the scientific industrial era. We've just got hard evidence. And so the only reference point we've got is to go back to this sort of agricultural era and these older religious values. And so typically this is what happens when we go through change, is we flick back, and this is the regressive search. We flick back, we look at, okay, how do we do this last time? It's like going back to an old job, something you don't do very often, like changing a car on the tyre, for example. Changing a car on the tyre. I'll flip that around. Changing a tyre on your car, if you get a flat tyre, it's like, oh, God, last time I did this was 5 years ago. How did I do that again? And you think back to the last way you did it. And that's what happens with moral development. We're thinking back, how do we do this last time we were living as community in that last paradigm? Oh yeah, I think it was something to do with this and that. Let's dig out the notes, and okay, so it's something to do with guilt, and we'll try that out and see if that works. And eventually we get to the point where we realise, okay, these older values, they're useful because they're a guideline, but we really need to work out current ones. And so that's a work in progress. So we're in a kind of a no man's land, a bit of a desert in terms of morality right now, where people are sort of clutching back to the older values. They're searching out the experimental new values. What happened in the 1960s? What happens in that weird place up in the Northern Rivers there, where there's a big pocket of new paradigm folks.
Hello out there.
And how do we live? What is the right way to live?
Yeah. Just quickly too, because as we've been saying, with this notion of do we break the planet, in this emerging paradigm, of course, there is a lot of guilt and there is a lot of shame for exactly what we're saying, this anthropocentric vision or view of how we've influenced things on the planet here. So we have sort of regressed to those earlier responses anyway to guilt and shame, and that would seem to be, that's obviously part of the slingshot effect. And I like the idea that you said there's this notion of love, because there is that tone to this now.
Well, there is, very clearly.
That's different. That's a difference, isn't it? That's a good way to articulate it, I think.
Yeah. And with that comes an absence of conflict and a general peaceful approach, which I think is wonderful. And that was very, very clear. It was encouraging for me to see how that Extinction Rebellion thing played out in London, because it really demonstrated some of the more developed aspects of the emerging paradigm, and that they're mature enough, in that community to be played out on a large scale and to be effective in bringing change, which is very interesting. Even
just the image of the very first demonstration of just a handful, 30 or 40 Extinction Rebellion activists standing way apart in the main street in Trafalgar Square, wherever they were, and just that idea that the togetherness was there, but they were sort of individuals that have come up with a smarter way of being together without having to be a whole horde intensely banging the barricades. It's
That's
just a
right.
subtle difference there.
Yeah, and you just hit on the nested nature of these value systems. So you've got the old agricultural values, then you've got the smarter, strategic, individually oriented modern scientific values layered on top, which gives you that smartness and strategy that you just pointed out. Yeah. And then the new communal values developing over the top of that. Yeah.
Someone's written in, Ash says, guilt, the mafia of the mind.
Yeah.
True enough.
Yeah, exactly.
And someone else just quickly, don't forget the earth is flat. Just ask via time travel the aristocratic, arselistic, pompous, camel turd-sucking nobles of the 16th century who put to the torch intelligent minds that had scientific insight and vision. Thanks, Shane. Yeah, well, that's certainly true.
Yeah.
That happened then.
So just moving on from that a little, it's interesting to look at the actual problems which are evident right now, the problems where we need to fix, which are becoming very, very obvious as people pop into this new way of seeing the world, which is the emerging paradigm, and look back at the old paradigm, the scientific industrial, and its impact on the planet. We see things like an imbalance of wealth in society. We see problems with our healthcare systems, which are generally disconnected rather than connected. We see social justice issues. We see depletion of natural resources. We see overfishing, which as an example of that. We see pollution of the ocean, vast islands of plastic. We see polluted air, contaminated food that's got pesticides and stuff in it that we're eating, broken political systems which don't seem to be, giving us leaders that can solve our most obvious problems and respond to how society is changing. And these are all very real things which are very measurable and present. And I put those problems in one category. And there's another category of problems, which is the expected, anticipated, or imagined problems.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And these are problems
Our projections.
Yeah, these are problems that aren't here yet, but may arrive sometime soon. And these are things like the Earth becoming uninhabitable due to climate change, for example.
That trumps everything else, so you can just stop
it. It does, and this is the interesting dynamic that's at play at the moment. Yeah, and associated with that is the possibility of human extinction. Are we exempt from this sixth mass extinction?
Doubtfully.
I don't think so.
Don't think so.
I think we're part of that same system.
Yep.
And so it's quite right that people should be concerned and even fearful about these things. And it's this that's contributing to the evolutionary tension, which is actually carrying us forward through the change process. Right.
Did you hear that, folks? So as much as you may feel fear and trepidation, especially if you happen to be left-leaning, you've lost the election and you're feeling this, that and the other, and you desperately going, am I going to get my affordable housing, and is the ABC going to be defunded, etc., 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 consider the possibility that all of that is part of a positive change somehow. You're resonating right now on Future Sense with Steve McDonald and Nick Jeans. Whatever it takes from imagining dragons kind of appropriate, and also the song itself. I don't know if you know the song. It's a bit poppy, but some great lyrics in there and pretty relevant to what we've been talking about this morning here on Future Sense.
Very good, Nick. And we're talking about this idea that humans broke the world and only we can fix it. And looking at some of the emotions associated with that perspective, which is part of the emerging paradigm. And in Claire Graves' research, he uncovered fractal patterns in human development, and these same patterns play out for us as individuals and also for groups, societies, countries, the whole of our species at a very large scale. So it's quite fascinating. And so by inquiring into our own experience, we can sometimes unlock keys to understanding large-scale change also. And one of the things that Graves researched partially in his process of trying to verify his model, his spiraling model of human development, he looked outside of his own profession, which was probably pretty radical for the time, considering that he was doing this research from the, early 1950s onwards through to the 1980s. And he found that guilt was the dominant emotion associated with the fourth layer of consciousness, which was dominant during the agricultural era. And really that was the end of his certainty around the association of emotions with layers of consciousness. However, he speculated that the dominant emotion associated with the modern scientific paradigm was manic excitement. And that kind of fits.
Yeah.
And what's also interesting is...
He's saying that from the 1950s when it wasn't particularly manically exciting, even after the Second World War.
Well, it was exciting in a 50s kind of a way.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't living in Adelaide, though.
No, that's true.
As I was.
The other thing that's interesting to look at is he did a little bit of research into the use of drugs. And again, it was partial, it wasn't complete, or, he didn't come to any great conclusions, but he associated the fourth layer of consciousness where the dominant emotion is guilt with the use of alcohol, which is like a numbing dumbing down drug, right? You know, I mean, the idea is life during that layer 4 agricultural era was a very long-term outlook, and you had to work really, really hard for a long time, and then you might get rewarded at the end of it if you did your duty well
with
enough.
With a beer.
Yeah, you might get rewarded. And from a religious point of view, you know, you live your life according to God's rules, and depending on how well you do that, and how faithfully you do it, with faith being more important, really. At the end, you might go to heaven, but if you made a slip up somewhere along the line, you might not go to heaven. So there was, it wasn't a particularly sort of optimistic outlook generally. And so the use of a drug that kind of takes you away from that long-term drudge, like alcohol, where you can kind of just dumb things down, numb your feelings, and forget about the guilt for a while. You can see how that fits.
Yeah.
And then if we look at the modern scientific industrial era and the corporate world, we think about the corporate drugs, things that are generally associated with manic excitement.
Again, we're generalising, but yes.
We're generalising.
Let's look at cocaine, for example.
Cocaine, exactly.
But also, alcohol continues to be, in Australia, is there's a statistic the other day, I can't speak today, the statistic the other day that said that Australia actually has the most problems with alcohol, the most referrals to medical help or hospitals from alcohol poisoning or problems in any other country in the world. Yeah. So we still got alcohol here, and I would suggest that there's a bit of manic excitement there, because it's like you drink for the manic excitement and then you dumb down after that. It's sort of secondary.
Look at the whole Red Bull thing, putting stimulants in your alcoholic drinks, yeah?
Exactly.
But also remember that these value systems are nested inside each other, so the old values don't go away. They're always there and accessible. So the alcohol hasn't gone away. It's still there, but we've tweaked it a bit, and we've added, more other drugs that are stimulants that, that fit with the manic excitement thing. And this was very tentative information in Graves's work. It wasn't an absolute conclusion. He was just basically speculating here, and he speculated in relation to layer 6, which is the emerging paradigm globally, that depression seemed to be the dominant emotion. And my personal interpretation of that is that he was researching at a time when there wasn't a lot of emerging paradigm like layer 6 values being expressed by people, and so he was probably seeing early stage. And it makes sense that when people suddenly wake up to this next layer of consciousness and they look through their new eyes at the scientific industrial era and they see all the damage that's been done and they see the polluted earth and the natural system suffering, then that's depressing.
Yeah.
Particularly in the early stage where they haven't got a big network of people who share their values, who they can work together with to solve the problems. So the obvious kind of emotional expression of that is depression, I think. But I expect, and this is just my speculation, that as the emerging paradigm grows and becomes more strong and it builds life conditions around itself which are supportive, that love will become the dominant emotion of this particular era.
And as you're speaking, I'm feeling also that there's a transition from pure depression, which is usually an isolated thing, as you're saying, because you're alone in that beginning stage. Then there's a sort of shared depression that it comes as you emerge into a community of one sort or the other, which kind of transfers the depression, I'd say, to a kind of grief, a merging together of depression into a communal grief, perhaps.
Yes. Which
is actually much more close to a sort of genuine feeling rather than emotional reactionary response.
Yes.
And that probably leads into the expression of love more, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And, at a personal level, often these things play out as a result of past trauma. And we can look back at the history of the world particularly through this scientific industrial era and the warfare that has taken place and all of the trauma that's been accumulated both personally and through DNA transfer,
epigenetics
that needs to be expressed as grief. Yeah. So I think you're on the money there.
Yes, yeah.
And it's interesting that we just had a grief event.
Yes, Stephen Jenkinson here, a couple of weekends ago. Yes.
Yeah, where we had a visiting death walker from the USA, and there was a public gathering, like a vigil, which was just oriented around grieving. So that's very interesting to see that playing out, and also you can transfer this personal experience across to the widespread social attitude at the moment towards these problems that we see, which were partially created by the scientific industrial paradigm, and partially are anticipated or imagined problems that could unfold if we don't act quickly enough. And you can see how there's a general feeling of depression around that. People are talking about extinction, human extinction. There's the Extinction Rebellion that's cropped up. So this kind of fits.
It's very interesting. The other 2 weeks ago on my Friday show, I had a couple of young women in here, local young women, Carla and Sophie, who were talking about eco-anxiety amongst the teenagers, and there's a house just up the corner here called Future Dreamers, where they have programs for young girls usually, but also boys sometimes, focused on this particular theme. And I saw her yesterday, actually bumped into her, and she said, we had so many people there. We had babies and kids, and we some guys as well, looking at for young people this impact of anxiety, of grief, of depression regarding particularly the extinction potential and ecocide, generally speaking.
Yeah. And one of the challenges that we're facing at this early stage of the paradigm shift is that the life conditions that would ideally support this new way of being human aren't really in place yet. We've got our social media, but it's based in technology that was created by the previous individualistic paradigm. So it's disconnecting, even though it's connected. You're connected electronically, you're disconnected personally.
So many paradoxes, which is getting us ready to accept paradoxes in the future more readily.
Yeah.
Got a few texts here, interesting bits and pieces.
Yeah, do you want to...
Well, I like this one, the first one for a little while ago, 10 minutes ago. Surely until each individual acknowledges the extraordinary miracle of being alive, there cannot be a collective respect.
That sounds like a reasonable comment. Yeah.
Does?
Yeah.
And someone else says there's an interesting talk on TED from April by Carolyn Cadwallader of The Observer, Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and their effect on Brexit. Does this explain Morrison's miracle? We've talked a little bit about that today.
It's possible.
It's possible. And lastly, a crazy one here. We'll maybe coming back to that. Thanks for Shane wriggling and giggling on the text here.
Yeah. So let's have a talk now about how this dynamic, these emotional dynamics, and the particular perspective on what seems to be wrong is impacting us generally, and also our capacity to practically address the issues. And one way that's unfolding is that the emerging paradigm's tendency to value and focus on the subjective experience and the relativism, this connection with other people and absorbing and sharing perspectives amongst a network of people, has had a huge impact on our science, for example. And our science around these issues that we see and have identified quite accurately as problems that need to be addressed, the science is being muddied and obscured because people are focusing on the subjective connection and people's subjective experiences, and also they're mixing the actual problems which exist today with the expected or imagined problems. And as you pointed out before, the expected or imagined problems kind of trump the existing problems, because it's like extinction is a much bigger issue than just a polluted ocean, right? However,
it's almost like the stakes have got higher in the last, even just the last few years, with regards to all
quickly,
of this. Very quickly
it's ramped up. Yeah. And so what's happening is that we're getting this muddy mix of actual problems and imagined problems, and feeling some emotional overwhelm, perhaps getting thrust into a state of depression as a result, and experiencing the hopelessness that can come with that, and that's a very reasonable experience at this time, where we haven't got the new paradigm built enough, for it to be thrown into action suddenly to resolve some of these issues. We're still facing the dominance of the old paradigm, which hasn't gone under yet, and it's difficult to predict how long that's going to take. I mean, looking at in my futurist work, looking at the cycles that we're in at the moment, things like solar cycles and those sorts of things, economic cycles, it looks to me, if I had to guess, when this global paradigm is going to flip from being dominated by the scientific industrial to dominated by this emerging humanistic paradigm, it looks like it might flip around about 2032.
Yeah.
That's a rough guess, a very, very rough guess. So if that's even roughly accurate, we're still more than a decade away.
And that's a lot of time in this modern era where there is so much in a given moment going on.
And it's a lot of time for that evolutionary tension to build. And these things are never clear cut. So what we'll see pockets. There are already pockets, communities around the world where the dominant paradigm within the bubble, the local bubble, is the new paradigm. And to some extent we live in one of those here in Byron Bay.
Yep.
And what we'll see, I expect, is kind of like when the water boils in a jug. So if you have a glass jug where you can see through the walls, and there's a few of them in the shops these days, then if you watch it boil, you can see that it doesn't just go from not boiling to boiling. You get one little bubble that forms, and then another little bubble, and another bubble, another bubble. And at some point, the network of bubbles goes through a sudden transition, and the whole liquid breaks into boiling.
Yeah.
And that's how this change will unfold. We'll get bubbles here, bubbles there, bubbles everywhere, and there'll be probably a number of tipping points where various parts of the planet flip into boiling, and you'll see the old paradigm slip under and the new paradigm become dominant.
Yeah, it's similar. I've mentioned before Barbara Marx Hubbard, the futurist and New Age doyen who just passed away recently did a piece for Findhorn Community where she was articulating how the current paradigm is this sort of blob, messy, very complex thing down here, and out of that are popping these new expressions everywhere, which of course they are, and that instead of trying to contest and repress and attack the dominant paradigm down here and try and manage that, it's the idea that she was espousing, was kind of what you're saying in a different way, was to actually help to connect and the outlying and often outrageous and unusual ideas that are popping up everywhere else, so that eventually those connections occur, and underneath the dominant paradigm just sort of falls away as part of the sort of compost embedded in and included in the future system as it's emerging.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a very sensible way of seeing this unfolding, is by all these bubbles connecting with each other and forming bigger bubbles, and the bubbles spread. But as I've been saying, though, one of the big impacts that the emerging paradigm is having on our science is it's muddying the clarity that we had in the scientific industrial era, where science was based on hard evidence. And if you wrote a scientific paper, it was peer reviewed and it was judged on its capacity to be replicated. Whatever your theory was, you described a theory of how something happened. Then if somebody read your paper and then could replicate your study, your experiment, then that was seen to prove its worth.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that we've lost in the muddying of the waters through this subjective focus in the communal communication process that's going on around all of these problems within the new paradigm. And the
search, I guess, for a new, as we talked about before, new moral system, new value system, because that also compounds that thing that you can get away with. You can get away with murder then, in terms of anything really that's supposedly claiming to be truth or real.
I know, and this is part of the dynamic of the fake news problem, is people can put news out there, and because we've kind of lost our anchor points in terms of knowing what's right and what's not right, and part of that is just because the pure volume of communication that's going on is overwhelming, and we haven't got time to sort through it all. What the outcome for that is that we are more easily fooled, because we can't reach for and grab hold of the solid evidence to show that something's right or wrong. It's been much more difficult to do.
And I think in that scenario where we are more easily fooled, it's also therefore easier to align yourself to some ideas which might be actually a bit too far some other way, a bit crazy here, crazy there, and that explains everything, some sort of outlandish conspiracy theory. And I'm not saying that all conspiracy theories are wrong, because clearly some of them are true. But there is that element, isn't there, when you don't know what the truth is, you'll kind of grasp at anything.
You get like a runaway effect. And this is absolutely happening in the climate change debate. And I've got an example here from a BBC News report, which was published in 2007. And it's talking about the ice melting in the poles, and particularly the Arctic. And the headline is "Arctic Summers Ice Free by 2013."
And that was an underestimation in the article, they say.
That's right.
We could be
could happen
more
sooner
optimistic than we should be.
Yeah, it could happen sooner than that. And clearly this didn't happen. And if we look at, using the climate issue as an example, if we look at the predictions that have been made over the years by all of the sort of key public figures that have stood up and said, this is a big problem, we have to fix it, the ice is going to disappear by this time, your children won't know what snow is, and those sorts of things. Consistently they've been wrong. Consistently their predictions have been wrong. However, the fear associated with this category of imagined, anticipated problems, because of the potentially severe outcome of human extinction, as an example, or the Earth becoming uninhabitable for all life, the fear driving that has swamped the fact that there's actually very little practical evidence, and there's actually a solid record of incorrect predictions being made, and even to the point where the IPCC, the United Nations
International Panel on Climate
Change, has actually, in a number of their reports, said that they've stopped looking at evidence of natural climate change now because human-induced climate change is more important. And these are huge risks that are emerging in terms of social systems and the way that we prepare for the future and the way that we avoid being radically surprised. These are huge risks that are emerging in our social systems that we really need to be aware of and take care of. And going back to the old analogy of trying to cross the river and not understanding where the currents are going in the river, if we come up with a community theory of where these currents are going in the river, but we haven't actually tested it, and in fact, that community theory that we've come up with, every time somebody's tried to test it, it hasn't actually been an accurate prediction. If we put all our eggs in that basket and then we all jump in the river, then we're all going to be horribly surprised when we hit the reality of where those currents are and where they're taking us. So this is a major risk, and it's really something that we should be talking about. And we're not pretending that we have the answers here. We're not pretending that we know what the climate's going to do.
No, we don't.
We're just pointing out the fact that there are massive blind spots emerging in our large-scale processes that we really need to be aware of.
For all of you out there, strangers in a strange land, you're grokking Future Sense here on Bay FM. 10:48 here on Bay FM. Last few minutes of Future Sense for this week, and it was a track called Courage from Clay Finnersand. I quite like that, and courage is perhaps a good position to adopt right now against all of this that we've been talking about today. And if you happen to be disappointed by the federal election result, perhaps that's what we need, a bit of courage and a reassessment of the timing and the time that we're going to take to move forward from here, because we are going to move forward. Change is happening anyway.
Certainly is. So we might just make a few conclusions to wind this up. And one other interesting thing in the process of researching some of this material within Claire Graves's work, I found some bits and pieces of biochemistry relationship or biochemical relationships between some of these emotions being expressed at particular worldviews and perspectives, and how the body chemistry is changing, which is really interesting. And it's not something that Graves made a complete study of. It was part of his verification process of reaching out to other scientists and looking for bits of information that supported his model, his understanding of human change.
And of course, it was we were talking about 60 or so years ago, 50, 60 years ago, this study. So his understanding at that time, and anybody's understanding of the sort of neuropsychology and physiology, was fairly minimal compared to where we are now.
Pretty sparse, yeah. It's a very interesting area, though, and something that I'm interested in trying to pursue
Absolutely.
a bit further to fill that picture out. So some conclusions that we can draw from what we've done during this show which is look at how human values are changing, how this regressive search to older values is impacting the dynamic at the moment, and how we can perhaps be a little bit wiser and more aware of the change dynamics themselves and inform ourselves in such a way that we can surf the waves of change rather than getting sort of sucked underneath with the currents. One of the things I guess that we conclude is that everything's not okay, and this is a very big theme at the moment, is that the world's broken and only we can fix it. So it's absolutely right to say that everything's not okay. We have damaged the planet in terms of making a big mess and damaging natural systems. We've damaged ourselves by ingesting, all the chemicals we put in our food and all this kind of stuff. There are things that need to be fixed. However, to say that we've broken the planet, I think, is an extreme, and it's a symptom of this anthropocentric bias that we have, in the same way that people back in the Middle Ages thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. We're here thinking that human action is at the center of all change on the planet, and that is simply a bias, and it's inaccurate. It's a partial truth. And so I think we can moderate that approach by just understanding, sure, there are things that we've been done that we have done that we need to fix, but there are also natural cycles at play here which we really don't understand very well, and we need to pursue the science of understanding those natural cycles and working with them. I think all of this speaks to the need to put new social systems in place so that we can bring about the changes more effectively. And we're seeing a general trend at the moment away from private sector dominance, which has been the central part or the central dynamic within the modern scientific industrial era, back to public sector dominance during the emerging era. And that's going to play out differently, because in the previous communal paradigm, public sector dominance was quite rigid and structured. In this emerging paradigm, it's going to be quite decentralized and very flexible. So it'll show up differently, but we're moving away from the private sector dominance thing. And I think that from a government point of view, the decentralization is going to change our system of governments quite radically. Yes. We're going to end up with something very different.
So focus on the local everything. That's really important at this time. Yes. And that network those networks that you can evolve and develop.
Yeah, absolutely. And things we can do, I think, number one is to stay super curious and open-minded. Don't get carried away by the hype, and just because everybody else is thinking something, don't assume that it's actually right and there's evidence to support it, because it's just not the case at this time in history. Assume that we don't have the science worked out. Anyone who says that the science is in isn't a scientist. Science is a never-ending feast, and we're always gathering new information and always analysing it and always modifying our understanding, upgrading our understanding of how things work. And that's become really important at the moment, because we are facing some very critical issues over the next couple of decades that we really need to figure out, A, how to address effectively, and then B, how to motivate people to fix them. Yeah. It all comes back, because this is a fractal model, it all comes back to knowing yourself also. Pay attention to your own nature, your own biases, your own compulsive behaviours, which sometimes lead to your downfall, because those things play out at scale. And if you can understand the dynamics within yourself, then you're also getting the key to understanding large-scale social dynamics also.
And that can be an development of intuition too, just to butt in there, isn't it? Because that's part of this new evolving paradigm, is this beginning to access and understand the difference between, say, intuition and pure emotional response to something.
No buts about it, Nick. That's true. Other things we can do is to take meaningful action. And right now, the great attraction is to talk, and gather together with other people to talk and talk about what needs to be done and tell other people what needs to be done. But we really need to take action. That is really an important thing at the moment. Take action to clean up our act, clean up the planet, make the world a more peaceful place, build better and fairer social systems, economic systems, political systems, justice systems, healthcare systems that are connected and not disconnected, and elect leaders, appoint leaders in whatever process is appropriate, who are committed to these positive changes, which are mindful of the large-scale impact that we're having, the things that need to be fixed, and who are interested in building community and not separating people. And who are also capable. They have the skills and the experience and the motivation to take effective action, not just talk about it and tell us lies to make us look the other way.
Very good. That's about it for the show. We'll just address a couple of these. Thanks for your texts. And two things. First of all, you can get all of our podcasts from our website, futuresense.it. Within a couple of days of the broadcast with an edited version of this show. Secondly, someone's asked me for an email address to myself. You can get me at president@bayfm.org is the best one, Shane, president@bayfm.org. And Melody, one of our long-term listeners, says or asks, perhaps if we can cause adverse future scenarios by imagining or projecting, then we can do so constructively if we understand the river's currents from love and not guilt.
Yes. Well, it's a very, very interesting scenario when you stand back and look at it, that all of these things are happening. A lot of them don't seem to be related to facts and evidence, yet they're all effectively building that evolutionary tension, which is absolutely necessary to bring large-scale change.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, listeners.
Nick.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be back next Monday morning, 9 to 11 here on Bay FM. And stay tuned here on your community, one and only radio station, Bay FM 99.9.
You've been listening to Future Sense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia, at bayfm.org. Future Sense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.